Hi, Year 11. Thanks to Mr. Hinks for this one, which is an overview of Eltham's history in the medieval and Tudor period, in other words, when it was a royal palace. So we can see that at the beginning, as we know, Bishop Beck, Bishop of Durham, gave Eltham to the royals. And then we have all the monarchs, all the way up to Charles I, who was executed in 1649. You do not need to remember all the monarchs and should not try to. But what it would be really helpful to do is just think about how well Eltham is doing across the late medieval and Tudor periods, how successful it's being, how much development there is, how much it's being used by the royals. And the path of success or failure, really, is something like that. So there are a couple of monarchs that's really useful to learn about in terms of proving Eltham was special and was used a lot. I think Queen Isabella in 1327 is useful. She's the lady who kind of basically did arrange for her husband, Edward II, to be murdered and feasted about it, celebrated it at Eltham. All right, it's this huge, huge party that the booklet talks about so well. I think Henry IV, then, so a couple of monarchs later, is helpful because he spent the vast majority of his Christmases at Eltham. And what do we know about Christmas? It's a time of relaxation, of feeling at home, of religious importance. Certainly in those times, you would want to be somewhere that you felt comfortable, that you enjoyed. And then the final medieval monarch I suggest you really make sure you learn about is Edward IV. You can see there a lot is happening. The Great Hall is largely, I was going to say restored, but that's not quite right. Beck had his Great Hall, but we don't know much about that. We know that the Great Hall that we know about dates from Edward IV's time. The fresh water system, if you remember, came down from elsewhere in the area, is added in his time, and he uses it greatly. The Tudors, it kind of shifts, right? It's quite important at the beginning. We know that Henry VIII and others of his generation spent time there as children. And we know that Henry VIII added a chapel, which I do think is helpful to keep in mind. That's under the turning circle now. However, then it's on the slide, as you can see. Basically because other palaces are better for what the Tudors want. Both Greenwich, so not far away at all, and Hampton Court, the new palace in the west of London, are much closer to the River Thames, so much easier to kind of travel between the different palaces. And Hampton Court in particular is on a vast scale. All right, huge amounts of opportunity there for the royals to enjoy. And then things slide rapidly under the Stuarts. So James and Charles are Stuarts. James uses it a little bit, gruesome fact, thank you, sir, but not loads, and talks about finding it far in decay, if you remember that quote. And in the midst of the destruction during the Civil War, Eltham is taken over by the Parliamentary Army, and we know that this man, Colonel Rich, takes the lead off the Great Hall roofs, kind of a symbol of the next 300 years of decline. So that's the story of Eltham as a royal palace. Get it really clear in your head. Remember the twists and the turns, and learn a few monarchs